Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigland out this week. I want to welcome back to the program Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy, co-host of the Undiplomatic pod, Matt Duss. Matt, we've talked in the past about the potential for something like this. Give me your sense of how surprised were you? I mean, if you go back even like 3 weeks ago, that the U.S. would attack the Iranians.
As of 3 weeks ago, even just over a week ago, I mean, just up until the moment the news broke of Israel launching its attacks, it was 2 Thursdays ago. It seemed that, diplomacy was moving along and we could get a deal. I mean, there were clearly some gaps. Trump seems to have landed on this demand for zero enrichment in Iran, which I think most people understand is a non-starter. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the people who are pushing him to make that a demand understand it's a non-starter because they intended it as a poison pill for the negotiations. But Stephen, it still seemed to me that, Witkoff was committed to it. The Iranians and Americans were talking to each other, which is good to be able to kind of narrow those gaps. But then, once Israel attacked, and the reporting started to come out about how Trump eventually went along with that, even if it wasn't a bright green light, it was enough of a yellowish light that Netanyahu went ahead and did what he did, making an enormous bet that Trump would eventually join in. And it seemed likely that given that Trump had sort of folded under pressure to support what Israel was doing, he would eventually fold and do what he did Saturday night.
Well, just to go back for just a moment in terms of like Trump's demands in the context of negotiations, were there other ones? I mean, I remember the original in the original JPOCA or
JCPOA, yeah.
Yes.
Almost, yeah.
I was close. That the biggest sort of like complaints of the neoconservatives was that this was just a deal about nuclear proliferation, as opposed to getting Iran to stop funding their proxy organizations, to a whole host of issues that they had. Was that included in the asks by the Trump administration?
Not to my knowledge, and you're right. That was one of the complaints that neocons had, was that this non-proliferation agreement didn't deal with things that aren't non-proliferation. But Trump, as far as I know, yes. I mean, I'm sure these things were being discussed. Iran's ballistic missiles and support for proxies, extremist groups around the region. But this was still pretty focused on the nuclear program, as far as I know.
My understanding is we don't really have a sense of what how effective the U.S. was at ending Iran's nuclear program. Have you heard anything to that effect?
I mean, I think we can say quite definitively that the United States and Israel have not ended Iran's nuclear program. I think just starting with satellite photos, you can see that there's damage done to the Fordo facility. Unsurprisingly, it dropped, B-2 bombers dropped, I think, the biggest non-nuclear weapon that the United States has several times on this mountain facility. But still, it's a big mountain and stuff is inside hardened bunkers deep under that mountain. If I would encourage folks to look at Jeffrey Lewis, he's an analyst at the Monterey Institute. The Middlebury Institute in Monterey, California. He had a long tweet thread based on a piece he'd written where he says, tactically, yes, this stuff's impressive, but this has at best, as far as we can tell right now, set back Iran's program several months. Again, it's hard to say for sure because Iran, from what I've heard, concluded that Trump was going to do this. They concluded this a couple weeks ago. And so they started transferring material to different places. There are, Fordo is kind of the big facility that people do know about. Everyone has long estimated there are facilities we don't know about. And Iran had told the IAEA that at some point it was going to open a new enrichment facility. And you can bet when they announced that facility, they would not be just like breaking ground for it on that day. It would be something that they had essentially already created. So yeah, it seems from the estimates I'm seeing, these attacks, this war, this grave violation of international law, has managed to set back Iran's nuclear program a fraction of what the JCPOA did.
I want to try and dig in a little bit more into what the goal here is, and like why Trump did this. But let's start with Israel, because it seems to me that Israel has at one point, and I don't know how many months ago it was, planned for this in the sense that they take out Hezbollah. They go deep into Syria. They attempt to degrade Yemen's capacity. Obviously, after the 4-week, truce in Gaza, they went on to further decimate, and now, a full-on starvation campaign, essentially, with the Palestinians there. But Iran's capacity to strike back seems to me has been diminished. I don't know how much, but certainly it's been diminished insofar as if Hezbollah still had its capacity, they would be sending rockets into northern Israel by now. Right. If Hamas had its capacity, they'd be sending rockets into southern Israel by now. If Yemen had increased capacity, they would also. I mean, I imagine that they have a little bit in the wake of the bombing campaign that Israel started against Iran a week or two ago. But it seems like Israel has been planning this, and that this is more about regime change than anything else. I mean, because it's clear. Even the U.S. did not, this is not like a quick one and done type of situation.
Yeah. Right. No, I mean, there's a couple things there. One is first, the last part first is, yes, at this point, it seems very, very clear that Israel's goal is regime change. I mean, it's bombing schools, it's bombing police stations, it bombed the gates of Evin prison just a few hours ago, a notorious prison where a lot of dissidents and activists are taken and often tortured by the regime. So it's bombing symbols of the regime. It's not just bombing nuclear facilities. And I think that's ultimately what they want to try and draw Donald Trump into. And if he's going to try, if he just wants to do this one and done strike, which again, I wish he hadn't done it, but now that he's done it, I hope that's what it is. That's obviously a much bigger proposition. And the idea that anyone thinks that this will turn out well just boggles my mind. But now we have to go back and what you talked about, over the course of, the past, whatever it is, 20 months since October 7, you'll notice that Israel steadily, started acting in a much more escalatory fashion wherever it wanted, whether, obviously obliterating Gaza and then, taking action in Lebanon and then Syria as well. Once the Assad regime fell. It's occupying parts of Syria right now. It has bombed Yemen. And again, it has genuine concerns with Hezbollah, with the Houthis. Syria, it's much, much less clear. But now, again, having weakened Iran's partners in exactly the way you said, and kind of what Iran used to have, what is known as strategic depth. I mean, that was the goal of forming all these relationships and supporting these groups across the region, was just to have different levers that they could pull. As a deterrent to keep Israel or the United States or anyone else from doing what is happening now, that those levers have been degraded. But it seems that if you want to apply a strategy to what Israel has been doing, and in part it's hard to apply a strategy because let's also remember a lot of this, as we have discussed before, is driven by Netanyahu's own political imperatives. I mean, he needs to keep this war going to stay out of jail, essentially. But if we want to see a pattern here, and this is where, if not toppling the regime, at least severely weakening the regime in Iran makes sense, because that's kind of what Israel and some in the United States want to see. Just a severely degraded region, if not collapsed states, then very weak states. That the United States and by proxy, the United States, local sheriff, Israel in this case, can kind of exert power.
I mean, this seems like a huge risk to me from Donald Trump's perspective. What do you think is actually driving this? I mean, they were 60 days is not that long to have a deadline for these negotiations. That seems absurd to me. Yes. And it, Donald Trump wanted to be, is portraying himself as a peacemaker. He already made his deals to get money from Miriam Adelson, and it didn't include backing up Israel's regime change. What is your sense that is actually driving this? Is it just he's got people? I mean, he specifically left Hegseth out. He specifically is ignoring all the intelligence that says this is not an ongoing threat.
Yes, right.
What is their thinking?
I mean, with Trump, it could be just very simple that enough people got into his ear and convinced him to change course. I think part of what I've heard is that Netanyahu and others were working on him really hard, saying the Iranians are taking you for a ride. They're treating you like a sucker. They're not negotiating in good faith. Listen, we saw how effective Netanyahu was at manipulating, Joe Biden and Joe Biden's team. He's done this with a number of presidents. Again, that's not to absolve the U.S. of our very clear responsibility not to get suckered into this stuff by Netanyahu, but he's really good at working the U.S. bureaucracy. And he certainly has allies within the administration. There was an ongoing debate between the administration's hawks and the administration's more restraint committed folks, people like J.D. Vance. My understanding was that Hegseth himself had been more on that side. Obviously, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, who most recently put out that assessment that you're talking about, that the U.S. intelligence community continues to assess that Iran has not made a decision to obtain a nuclear weapon. So, I think Trump obviously was convinced to go ahead and yellowish green light the Israeli attack. And from what I've read, and I find this convincing, is that popped off. And he spent the night watching Fox News, hailing this, all the, the footage of this impressive stuff that the Israelis can do, and they can do some really impressive stuff. And, when the initial news of the attack broke, you saw the statement from Secretary Rubio saying, oh, well, Israel's doing this. We're not part of it. They've taken these steps on their own. But by the morning, Trump puts out a Truth Social post, clearly trying to associate him more with the war, saying, oh, yes, it's just, just wonderful, and trying to take some credit for it. So I think he's unfortunately just been convinced that this is how you do MAGA.
Let me ask you about this, and this is complete speculation and conjecture on my life, because it seems like, I mean, I give very little credit to Donald Trump as a thinker in any way, but one thing that he does have a sense of is like protecting his own political hide. Yeah. And it's hard for me to imagine what the upside is for him on this. But I wonder, Saudi Arabia has been so quiet relative to its what was a very heated proxy war up until I feel like a year ago, maybe, less. And, as late as a year or 2 years ago, it seemed that everything that was happening in the Middle East was a function in some way of this war, proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. To what extent do you think there is, the interests of those Gulf states maybe sitting back, also encouraging Trump in a very, very quiet way to do something like this? I mean, this is clearly picking up from the neocon vision that started in the Iraq War. Yep. Like we're going to go to Iraq, then we're going to go to Syria, then we're going to go to Iran. And the Middle East is going to be basically like Disneyland with democracy. And I wonder if that dream wasn't revived less from an ideological standpoint in Donald Trump's mind, but in terms of there's a lot of money for me here, and it's worth a lot to the Saudis for me to engage in this.
Well, that's just it. He was getting that money anyway. And you're right. Up until a few years ago, especially during the era of the JCPOA when Obama was trying to make a deal with the Iranians. There was strong opposition from the Saudis, from the Emiratis, and obviously from the Israelis. But let's remember, a few years ago, there was a Saudi-Iran détente that was brokered by China. Mohammed bin Salman, well, obviously I have a lot of problems with him. He's actually been trying to have better relations with Iran. He's been trying to have better relations with a lot of actors in the region. They've basically squashed the beef with Qatar. So, while I'm not going to say that they're displeased at Iran, the Iranian government taking a beating, I don't think this is something that the Saudis were really strongly advocating, because they're kind of getting what they want from Donald Trump anyway. And so to have the Israelis and the Americans now coming behind them, just, unilaterally going in and smashing up Tehran, another major Middle Eastern capital, that's not something that really sits well with the region's publics. And Mohammed bin Salman and some of these other leaders are conscious that of public opinion.
Interesting. And so give me your, I mean, it's anybody's guess what happens next. But I guess it has to do with the likelihood of Iran retaliating. And then it feels like it could be off to the races. What is your sense? Right.
I mean, so what we're seeing today, I mean, there was a few hours ago, there was news that the Qatari government had urged Americans in the countries to shelter in place. Always a great phrase that means trouble is on the way. They've closed Qatari airspace. I don't know if this indicates that Iran could be striking El Udeid base, which is the U.S.'s biggest base in the Middle East. They're just outside Doha, Qatar. We did see, I mean, my sense is even before Trump attacked, I mean, Iran was signaling that they want to de-escalate. They did not want the U.S. to get involved, and they were ready to de-escalate, but they were not ready to negotiate peace while Israel was still attacking them, understandably. But let's think back to, 2020, January 2020, when Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, and kind of Iran's like regional mastermind and planner for all of Iran's kind of proxy groups. Iran responded with an hours long. First of all, it signaled that it was going to respond. It needed to respond, but this response would be a one-off. They did not want to escalate further, but then they launched an hours-long missile attack against al-Assad base in Iraq that nearly killed 150 U.S. troops who were there sheltering in these bunkers as this attack went on. And then it came out slowly, little by little, that over 100 of them had sustained traumatic brain injuries. Now, Trump himself, it was very interesting. Like they initially denied that there were any casualties. And then little by little, they started to say, okay, a few people were hurt. And then it finally came out, no, 100 were pretty severely injured. But that signaled that Trump understood, okay, I want this to de-escalate too. And if it immediately comes out rather than in dribs and drabs of that there were actual serious casualties, it could create political pressure on me to have to escalate. I mean, so that does indicate a level of political intelligence, or at least understanding, like I could be pushed into something that I don't want to do. I hope that there will be something similar that happens now.
I hope you're right. Matt Duss, I have a feeling we'll probably be in touch over the coming weeks. Really appreciate your insights here and analysis. And we will link to the Center for International Policy and your Undiplomatic pod.
Thanks a lot, Sam.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.